So welcome everyone to another Design Gold episode, and today we're going to talk about a bit about security and sort of what does that mean in the world of design and tech. And yeah, we know sort of it's a thing, and the light of it coming out from issues where sort of Facebook has gotten exposed, and then now regulations are coming into effect, like in the EU, the GDPR rulings that sort of help to maintain some sense of order and sort of try and bring the end user up to speed without these companies just throwing legal jargon at you. And what does that mean for us? And what does that mean when we're trying to design security systems?
Perfect.
So it's more than just a technical implementation, but like we can store data in a secure way. But how do we think about using it and giving it some actual sort of access to that security, right? So sort of one silly example would be, can you imagine if every time you sat in your car, you had to type in a password, right? Okay, that seems to make sense because someone could like hack a key, okay? But then what if it made you do that every 20 minutes? Well, that would be quite silly because clearly you're sitting in the car, you're driving, and every 20 minutes you have to type in a password. Well, you're more than likely going to end up running into something. Or if there's a passenger, you're going to tell them the password. And then, well, great, we haven't solved the security problem because now you've just given the password to everybody in your car, right? It's sort of what we do with sticky notes when people are like, oh, you need to create a password that's at least 5,000 characters long and have 2 syllables and special character this and this and this and this. And then people are like, I can't remember this. So they write it down and they put it on their desktop. It's like, well, you sort of defeated the purpose of the security. So
Exactly.
this idea of how do we design security without, so it still makes sense and matches how people are actually going to use it.
Exactly. This is a very good question because it brings up the concept of security, privacy, and just looking at human nature and how, there's kind of like this underlying concept of trust, So before digital technology, there was a particular way we would deal and interact with one another with regard to trust. You have like handshakes, you have salutes, basically like these symbols of and practices that allow us to get to know each other and to trust each other. And then you're able to kind of share secrets, give passwords. But there was always that kind of sense of who's overhearing this. And this was a problem then, and it's a problem now. It didn't go away, and it's the same thing with your example of being in the car and you're giving out your password to a particular device. Everybody then would hear it, and so designing now technology around these kind of constraints is interesting. And I'm kind of wondering what solutions there are to this particular example that you gave.
Right. Well, I mean, I think there's a variety, right? So there's Apple has this good feature where if you want to log into your computer and you have an Apple Watch and they're both logged into your iCloud account, if you go and turn on the computer and you go to the login screen and your watch is like unlocked and sort of on your wrist, then it'll unlock the computer. Where it's like, since one device has been authenticated and it's physically near the other one, more than likely that's the user. Well, in most cases, right? There's still a case where somebody could be sleeping on the couch or something and they have the watch on, and I want to be nasty and take their computer and open it, and now it's unlocked, right? And they're not going to notice it because they're sleeping, even though it does notify both the watch and the computer, and it says, hey, like, we have unlocked your computer. But there's still, I mean, it's not a perfect solution, but in most cases that works. So there's examples like that, and there's probably, well, let's see, there's probably other solutions where there's like a nice handshake. I mean, I guess in a similar way, mobile phones, most of them now have some kind of fingerprint reader, right? Like that is data that's quite complicated for people to remember, but not for systems to remember. So we use that as the login rather than typing in like a 4-digit code or some alphanumeric password. So that could be one way.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think this also brings to point, like, on the flip side, what's sort of the false sense of security is that we have, where people assume these things are so secure, and then it just isn't. I think smart home devices, especially since it's sort of still a new field, like in the consumer electronics division,
Mm-hmm.
is this sort of people buy smart camera, smart toaster, smart light fixture, whatever, but all of these things have those companies thought about security in a serious way that some of these bigger companies who have been into like cyber tech for so long
Mm-hmm.
have, and how are they marketing that towards users? Most of it seems to be marketed as, oh, this is perfect, you just plug it in, good to go, oh, no problem. But problem being, well, now that I hack your toaster, everything that's connected to your house is now
Yeah.
mine.
No, yeah, you bring up some very good points, and just conceptually thinking about what security means. There isn't any one answer that covers all of the scenarios and throughout time, right? So, particularly, um, I'm thinking about the alarm for cars. I have a really
Mm,
old car. It came with a built-in alarm, which means that that the I'm forgetting what's called when you're honking. So the
the
horn,
horn,
it just goes off if somebody tries to get in, or
right?
maybe pushes the car too hard. And if you look around, and it happened to me actually about a week ago, that I had left. I locked myself out, and I have a spare set of keys in my car because I had locked myself out of my house, and there's a spare keys to the house in my car. Don't tell anybody. And so I just hid it in there, and I had to break it into my own car, and I had left the window open.
Right.
So I basically just kind of stuck my hand through the window and opened the car, and of course the alarm went off, and it was just going off for about 4 or 5 minutes. As I was trying to, as I was getting the keys, I ran upstairs, opened the door, and I could hear it go off. Nobody even asked me, even the neighbors, or nobody went outside to look. There wasn't anybody really interested in seeing what the hell
Right.
was going on. So then you ask yourself, what is the point of that function now, right? So it's a false sense of
Right.
security that I even lock my car and put the alarm on. It doesn't make
Right.
sense.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so that points to, that's a very simple example, but a lot of the devices that we have now, they just put these kind of buzzwords on the box, right, of these devices. It has this and
Mm,
this security, but at the end of the day, if somebody wants to break into your home, they can most likely do that. If somebody really wants your car, they can probably take off with it. And
right.
maybe it's even making me think that we started to have this false sense of security and started relying on technology without us even being a little more aware that we still need to be cognizant of the things around us, or even improve our practices. We kind of become lax and kind of just said
Mm,
technology will take care of it. And so we
right.
start even doing more silly, stupid things, in a more. I mean, I don't want to say that being trustworthy is bad, but I mean, we start trusting things to some what we feel is an autonomous technology, right? Like it will take care of
Hmm.
us.
Right. Right. Just sort of letting it, assuming that it can do more than it's actually supposed to do, and people buying into that's the purpose. I mean, no one has ever said, to my knowledge, that a door lock is meant to stop a truck from bulldozing your house,
Right.
right? Like, nobody says that. It's to keep the people who may be tempted to open the door and just come in to keep them out. But if you really want to get in, yeah, like you could kick the door down, you could get a sledgehammer and smack the lock out, you could just drive a car through the door. Like there's ways to get around
Yeah.
it, but it's really not meant for that purpose. It's that old I forgot what it is, but there's an old saying basically that says these like locks and things to that nature are to keep good people good, not the bad people out.
Interesting. I like that.
Because you're not actually influencing how people who are actually motivated to come in and be destructive, they're going to do it anyways, right? So
Yeah, exactly. So when you're designing for security, you have to kind of, I guess, keep in mind that in the design of particular features, you are also influence how people use those things, and you influence their behavior. So to go back to kind of like this concept of you're not going to get rid of the human element. If technology tries to do everything for its users, then they're going to become dependent on it. So then you're creating an even bigger risk in both promising and designing for that kind of functionality, where you're promising that you will keep them completely secure. And so you're also shooting yourself potentially in the foot, because when one of your features fails, and it fails not just because, or not only because it doesn't work, but maybe because it doesn't work because of the way you design it, then you're basically liable, or at some point damaging your product for designing it that way.
Right, you've oversold it through your design.
Yes.
That something technology cannot back up.
Exactly.
And then people assume you're responsible, where if you were more realistic, they probably wouldn't assume you're responsible and say, hey, maybe I should change my behavior because there are limitations to that thing that I'm interacting with.
Exactly. And I mean, that is a change in business model, or kind of positioning. What if, is there a company out there that basically it's upfront about it and says, look, we have these security issues, but here are the best practices? Because this is going to work with a combination of the human element and the technological element, right? And if you somehow design to make your users aware of that and influence positive behaviors that keep them still, in some form of control, instead of having the user give up all of the control, maybe that's the way to go. But I don't think we're there right now. I think, you look at this at a company, and it would want to design everything for the user so that it can become the best-selling product out there, even though it may potentially fail. And look at what's happening now, for example, with this Equifax security breach, right? One of the biggest ones in our history. I mean, almost half of U.S. Citizens were hacked. And you're seeing a lot of hacking in a lot of the banks, in applications. Facebook got hacked. Like my fitness pal that I use got hacked, I believe.
Well, and the scarier thing is, like, these things happen and you only hear about them on the news, right? There's no user feedback in the same way that if someone broke down my door and took something from my house, that I would acknowledge it. Because my experience with Facebook or Fitness Pal or any of these tools don't really change after someone's broken in. They clean it up and it looks like nothing's happened, and every so often you get an email that says, hey, we'd recommend you changing a password. That's it. So it's like hush hush, brush it under the rug.
Yes.
Where if someone physically breaks into a store and I'm walking down, I'll be like, they just broke the window, they probably shouldn't be inside. maybe I should do something about it.
Yeah, you're right.
But because people are hiding in their basement or whatever, and like just on their computer, I don't know. I don't see what's happening.
Yeah, there is definitely an ethical issue there. This lack of transparency, and I mean, in having to do with Equifax, I believe they came out only months later after they were hacked, which means that your data was out there for a few months before you even knew about it and before you could even do anything.
Right.
If I don't even know what you can do, but
Right.
because you have your social security number, and it's very difficult to change that, I believe.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is right on. I mean, it's a false sense of security, and this kind of theme of autonomy. I know I keep using that word, but you are basically negotiating autonomy between technology and humanity, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the more that technology does for you, the less autonomous you become, the less agency you really have. So you're giving up some rights. And I
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
found a quote that reminds me of a good quote by, I think it was Benjamin Franklin. It says, "Any society that would give up little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both." Which means that
Mm.
once we get an Equifax fail, once we get a breach in security that really impacts you, you've lost everything. You've lost both, right?
Right.
And so what you have to think of that risk.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. You have to think about the risk, and you just have to be. I mean, people just have to be, I think, a bit more realistic with technology, both from an end user and like think and ask the questions. Hey, is that truly realistic of what these organizations, whether it's a product you buy or a service you're using, what they're selling me, is that truly on point, or is it pushed a little bit for fluff to sort of help with marketing? Now, everyone sort of does it to a point, but I think there's a point where it goes beyond what is sort of ethical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think to that, in the case of like if you're interested in sort of digital privacy and sort of that realm, there's this great organization called the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and it's EFF.org, and they sort of talk to web security and sort of encryption and what does this mean, the likes of net neutrality and sort of all these pieces. And they sort of talk to it, tell you what they mean, because a lot of these things are not straightforward to begin with. The idea of transparency and privacy and what to do about these things if you're interested. So also feel free to take a look at that their content if it's something you're interested in. But
Yeah, no, that's thanks for that. I didn't know about that site. I'm gonna go check that out. There is another grad student at my school. She's a year or two ahead of me, and she was working on. So she was basically interested in privacy and agreements. When you sign up for a particular application or software, there's this kind of long contract that
the terms and conditions and the privacy policy stuff.
exactly. She's
Yeah.
looking into that, and basically in a paper made the point that that is basically there. The fact that they're even informing you is because they're following the law, right? They're giving you,
Right.
and it's that privacy agreement is written for the company to protect the company.
Right.
And a lot of those things, you're basically signing everything that you upload to a particular platform. Sometimes you've given it up.
Right.
And what she does is she points these things out, obviously, and says that there isn't a
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a consumer advocacy group that looks at these kind of terms and policies and agreements and vouches on behalf of the consumers. This doesn't
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
exist. And as a whole, obviously, there's probably like Consumer Reports. I think what they do is they provide you with information, but it's up to you to go and read it and get informed. But more
Right.
and more, app developers are basically just sticking all of these terms and conditions and these agreements and you almost can't use anything or any app out there without having to kind of sell your soul. I mean, I'm exaggerating,
To
but yeah,
agree to
you have to
them.
agree to them, right?
Right.
And then another student actually was thinking about having an application or some sort of plugin that would actually read through all of that junk and kind of give you a sort of sense of what you're actually giving up. So, like the pros and cons.
Mm.
And so, I guess one of the students wanted to do it kind of legally, so talk through the policymakers, and after she gets her PhD, she wants to see if she could push this, or even during to create some policies to kind of protect consumers. The other the
That'll be
other
cool.
student was more like, this may never happen. You know how things are going right now, and you could somebody could be a little subversive and write an application that just or a plugin that just does this for you, right? And at the very
Right.
least, you're aware of what you're signing up for, and the fact that your information may be breached, it can be hacked, and
Right.
what you're losing.
Right. Well, I think in part that was where GDPR, which stands for the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, comes into existence. I think there's a clause that sort of talks to it needs to be human readable, short and concise, and that's sort of part of it. Is most of this is just jargon that no one understands, and how do we help the user understand? In these projects that you mentioned, that these your sort of colleagues are working on, that's awesome. And there was a similar project in a different vein. It was more of visualization, but at NYU as part of the IPT program that looked at it sort of was a dress with electrochromatic panels, so panels that are charged with electricity, and as you change the amount of power that goes through them, they change opacity. So the dress sort of starts out completely opaque, and as it's connected up to your phone, so as data gets transmitted to different services, online, social networks, etc., it starts to go sort of transparent, and then you notice there's a physical manifestation of this sharing of data as you're like becoming more naked,
Yeah.
right, if you will. So that's an interesting product, and it's called Expose, so X.pose. It's a pretty cool project, so definitely check that one out. I'm a big fan of that one.
That is very cool. Yeah, we talked about that in another podcast episode. And this is the kind of subversive movement, right, that should either keep going in its own way. It doesn't have to coalesce into anything. It could, and it would be more powerful that way. But we need to be aware of these problems with technology as they relate to products, and to society, and to individuals, and kind of keep pressing, because if we just let things happen, they will most likely not happen in our favor, in the individual kind of favor, and the powerless, or sometimes not so savvy users, right?
No, for sure. Yeah, I think that'll wrap up this episode about sort of designing securities.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Design Gold. To learn more about the show, follow us online at DesignGold.xyz.